Hannah had only planned to stop at the roadside auction for a few minutes. She needed old wooden crates for her small clinic and maybe some blankets if she found them cheap. The morning was cold, the sky pale gray, and the wind carried dust across the open field where people gathered every month to trade things they no longer needed. The place was noisy with voices, bargaining, animals bleating, and the sharp sound of the auctioneer calling out numbers. Hannah wrapped her coat tighter around herself and walked through the crowd, thinking she would finish quickly and return to her patients before noon. She passed tables filled with rusty tools, cracked lanterns, used boots, and metal parts no one could identify. She barely paid attention. Her eyes were focused ahead, but her mind was already on her clinic. She needed supplies. That was all. She had no idea that something waiting just a few steps ahead would change her entire life. Hannah turned to walk toward the livestock area, but suddenly she noticed a group of men sitting on the ground near a wooden platform. They were debt laborers, men who signed contracts to work for whoever bought their labor time. It was common in that region, especially for men who had no steady work or who had been moved from place to place. Usually, Hannah never looked closely at them, because it always made her heart heavy to see anyone sitting like that, waiting to be claimed by a stranger. But today, as she walked past them, her eyes caught something different. One of the men was not sitting with the group. He was off to the side, leaning forward with his elbows resting on his knees, his head slightly down. His clothes were worn and dirty, his hair tangled like he had not brushed it in days. His face had a strange tiredness that made him look older than he probably was. There was something about him that felt out of place, like he did not belong there at all. Hannah almost walked past him. Almost. But then something made her stop. It was a small movement. He shifted his arm just a little, and the sleeve of his shirt slid up. For a moment, a mark on his skin became visible. A tattoo. Simple lines forming a cross with a rising sun behind it. The sight of it hit her like a shock. She had seen that tattoo before. Her breath caught in her throat as a memory flashed in her mind. Years ago, she had been on a bus traveling through the mountains when a landslide hit the road. The bus flipped, crashed, and everything turned dark. She remembered screaming, smoke, broken glass, and not being able to move. Then she remembered hands pulling her, strong hands lifting her out of the wreckage. She saw part of a man's arm, covered in dust, and that same tattoo, sharp and clear against his skin. He had carried her through smoke and falling stones and placed her safely away from the danger before disappearing into the chaos. She never saw him again. She didn't know his name. She didn't even know if he lived. But she had never forgotten that tattoo. Now, in front of her, on this cold, dusty morning, the same symbol was on the arm of the man sitting alone. Her heart began to pound fast. Her mind struggled to accept what she was seeing. The man looked rough, tired, and very different from the strong figure she remembered. But the tattoo was the same, and that memory was burned into her soul. Without thinking, she stepped forward. Her voice rose louder than she intended. "Stop!" The auctioneer paused mid-sentence, surprised. People nearby turned to look at her. She felt all eyes on her, but she didn't care. She pointed at the man sitting alone. "I'm buying him," she said firmly, surprising even herself. A wave of confusion passed through the crowd. Women rarely bought labor contracts, and Hannah was known for being quiet and gentle, not someone who made bold decisions. The auctioneer blinked, then shrugged and called out a price. It wasn't high. The man looked too exhausted for anyone to fight over. Hannah agreed immediately. When the auctioneer stamped the papers and handed them to her, the people around whispered among themselves. Some looked confused, some curious. A few even amused. But Hannah ignored them all. Her focus remained on the man with the tattoo. She walked toward him slowly. He lifted his head for the first time. His eyes were dull, as if he had not slept properly in weeks. They looked at her with confusion but without anger or fear, almost like he didn't understand why someone had chosen him. "I'm Hannah," she said softly. He blinked once, then nodded. "Elias," he replied in a quiet voice, rough like he had not spoken much recently. Even his voice felt familiar, echoing faintly from the memory she carried. She didn't know what to say next. The moment felt unreal, like she was standing between the past and the present, unsure how the two could be the same. "Come with me," she said gently. "You're coming home with me." Elias hesitated. He looked at the ground, then at the crowd. And finally, at Hannah again. He seemed unsure, but he stood slowly, his movements stiff and tired. When he rose, she noticed his hands were scraped, his knuckles bruised, and his posture tense like a man who lived in constant watchfulness. As they walked across the field toward her truck, Hannah couldn't stop glancing at him. She wanted to ask him 1,000 questions. Did he remember her? Was he the same man who saved her? Why was he here, looking so lost? But something told her not to rush. He looked fragile in a way she couldn't fully understand, like someone carrying a heavy burden silently. When they reached the truck, Elias paused. "Why did you choose me?" he asked quietly. Hannah swallowed hard. She couldn't tell him the whole truth yet. It felt too big, too sudden. "You looked like you needed help," she said honestly. "And I just felt I should." Elias didn't argue. He climbed into the truck slowly, as if even sitting took effort. Hannah started the engine, and the drive back to her small clinic cottage began in silence. The road was long and empty, stretching through hills and patches of trees. Hannah kept her eyes on the road, but her thoughts were all on Elias. Every few minutes she glanced sideways. Elias sat staring out the window, his face expressionless, but she noticed his hand resting over his forearm, covering the tattoo as if he didn't want it to be seen. The gesture made her heart ache. What had life done to him? How had the man who saved her life ended up sitting alone at an auction, looking like the world had forgotten him? They reached her home, an old cottage beside her small clinic building. She offered him water, which he drank quickly like he had been thirsty for a long time. She showed him a small spare room with a clean bed, but he looked unsure, almost uncomfortable. "You can rest here," she said softly. "You're safe." Elias nodded but didn't sit. He kept scanning the room like he was checking for danger. Hannah noticed it again, that silent alertness. Something in his life had taught him not to relax. She stepped back to give him space. As she walked toward the kitchen, her mind kept circling the same question. Should she tell him she recognized the tattoo? Should she tell him he once saved her? But she knew he was not ready. His eyes held too much exhaustion, too much confusion. So she waited. A few minutes later, she returned and saw him finally sitting on the bed, but not leaning back. He sat on the edge, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor just like he had been doing at the auction. "Elias," she said gently, "you don't have to be afraid here." He looked up slowly. For a moment, the tiredness in his eyes softened. "I'm not afraid," he said. "Just not used to this." "Used to what?" she asked. He hesitated. "Kindness." Those words struck her deeply. Hannah wanted to say something, to offer comfort, but she knew she needed to move carefully. Instead, she gave a small smile and nodded. "Rest for now. We can talk later." As she stepped out of the room, she placed her hand on the doorframe to steady herself. Her heart was still pounding from everything that had happened. She had brought home a man who once saved her life, a man who didn't even know she remembered him. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know how to bridge the distance between their past and their present. But she did know one thing. She wasn't going to let him slip away again. Not this time. Hannah woke early the next morning, long before the sun reached the windows. She checked the clinic, prepared hot water, and made breakfast for her patients, trying to focus on her usual routine. But her mind kept drifting toward the spare room where Elias slept. She wondered if he was awake, if he felt safe, if he remembered anything from the past. She tried not to let her hopes grow too fast. After all, she knew only the tattoo connected him to her memory. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe it was only a coincidence. But deep inside, something told her she wasn't mistaken. She walked softly to the room and knocked lightly. No sound came back. When she opened the door just a little, she saw the bed was empty. For a moment, her heart sank. She thought he might have slipped away before sunrise, maybe afraid or confused. She stepped inside quickly, looking around. Then she saw him near the front door of the cottage, sitting quietly on the floor with his back against the wall. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't even resting. He was watching the door like a guard. Elias turned his head slowly when he heard her footsteps. She saw how tired his eyes were, how even after sleeping a full night he still looked like a man carrying years of heaviness. "You didn't have to sleep here," Hannah said gently. "Your bed is warm." "I know," he replied softly. "But doors make me alert." Hannah didn't push for more explanation. She simply nodded and walked to the kitchen. "I made breakfast, if you're hungry." He stood slowly, as if unsure if he was allowed. She noticed again that carefulness in him, the way he moved like someone who expected to be ordered or corrected at any moment. He followed her quietly to the kitchen table and sat down. His hands were rough and scraped, and he kept them close to himself as if afraid to touch anything. She placed food in front of him, and he looked at it for a few seconds before taking a bite. He ate quietly, politely, but with a hunger she could see he was trying to hide. Hannah didn't say anything about it. She just watched him with soft eyes, letting him feel calm. After breakfast, she told him she needed to check her clinic patients. He offered to help carry supplies without being asked. His voice was low, but his tone was steady. She agreed. And soon they walked to the small clinic building beside the cottage. Inside, Hannah saw something she did not expect. Elias moved through the room with a natural sense of awareness. He helped her organize crates, carried water containers, arranged medicine boxes, and cleaned surfaces. He never asked what to do. He just watched her once and understood immediately. She realized he had been trained somewhere somehow to respond quickly and quietly. While she treated two of her regular patients, Elias stayed near the doorway, standing so still he almost disappeared into the corner. When one old man accidentally slipped on the floor, Elias reacted faster than anyone else. He stepped forward instantly, catching the man gently before he hit the ground. The old man blinked in surprise. "You're fast, young man." Elias gave a small nod and stepped back, not wanting attention. Hannah watched with a soft smile. Every hour she spent around him brought more clues. He wasn't just strong. He was trained, disciplined, and used to danger. When the clinic became quiet again, Hannah walked outside to get some fresh air. The sky was bright now, the clouds soft and floating slowly. Elias followed her, stopping a few steps behind as if unsure whether he should speak. "You don't have to stay far away," she said gently. "You're not in trouble here." He lowered his gaze. "Force of habit." "You didn't come from a peaceful life, did you?" Hannah asked quietly. He hesitated. He didn't speak for a long time. She thought he wouldn't answer at all. But finally he said, "Not really. Life took me from place to place. Never had time to settle anywhere. I learned to be alert all the time." Hannah wanted to ask more, but she sensed he was only giving her small pieces for now. She didn't want to push too quickly. Later that afternoon, rain began to fall. It started as a light drizzle, then grew heavier, tapping loudly on the roof of the clinic. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The sound made Elias pause. Hannah noticed how his shoulders tightened, how his eyes flickered with an old memory. "Are you okay?" she asked. He nodded, but the tension in his expression told another story. He walked to the window and stared out at the rain as if searching for something. Hannah walked beside him quietly. For a moment, they just listened to the storm. When thunder cracked loudly across the sky, Elias closed his eyes, his hands clenched slightly. Then he whispered something Hannah didn't expect. "I remember pulling someone out of a broken bus on a night like this. Smoke, fire, rain, mixing with dust." Hannah froze. Her breath stopped. Her heart raced. "That was you?" she whispered, the words trembling out of her mouth before she could stop them. Elias opened his eyes slowly, confusion crossing his face. He looked at her, surprised. "You know about that?" Hannah stepped back a little, struggling to steady her breathing. "I was there. I was in that bus. Someone saved me. I saw the tattoo on his arm before he disappeared." Elias looked down at his forearm, where the tattoo still showed faintly. His expression changed. Surprise, recognition, worry, and something like guilt all mixed together. He whispered, "I didn't think anyone remembered." "I remember everything," Hannah said softly. Her voice was shaking, not from fear but from emotion she had held inside for years. "You carried me out, you kept me alive, and then you vanished." Elias looked away, his jaw tightening. "I didn't stay because it was complicated. After that rescue, something happened. I got blamed for something I didn't do. They moved me, kept moving me, until I lost track of where I belonged." Hannah felt her chest tighten with sympathy. "All this time? You went through that alone?" He nodded. "I didn't want anyone from that day to know what became of me." "But why?" she asked. He hesitated again, searching for words. "Because I didn't want them to see me like this. I used to be stronger, better. Now I'm just someone drifting from one place to another." Hannah stepped closer. "You're still the man who saved lives. That doesn't disappear." But Elias shook his head softly. "Not in my world." The room felt heavy with silence after that. The storm still rolled outside, but inside the clinic, everything felt still. Hannah didn't know how to break his sadness, but she also knew she couldn't let him slip into guilt. "You aren't alone anymore," she said finally. "You're here now, and you're safe." Elias looked at her for a long moment. Something softened in his eyes, something fragile and hesitant, but real. It was the first time he looked less like a drifting man and more like someone who wanted to stay. As evening came, Hannah cooked dinner and invited him to sit at the table with her. He hesitated but eventually joined her. They ate quietly, but this time the silence felt gentle rather than heavy. Elias seemed calmer, more open, though he still looked like he carried an invisible weight on his shoulders. Later, when she showed him the spare room again, he finally sat on the bed without resisting. He didn't lie down, but at least he allowed himself to rest properly. Hannah stayed near the doorway, unsure if she should leave or stay. "You saved my life," she said softly. "I can't forget that, and whatever happened to you after that, it wasn't your fault." Elias gave a slow breath, as if her words touched something deep inside him. "You shouldn't trust me so easily," he said quietly. "But I already do," she replied gently. Elias looked at her with confusion and something like gratitude. For the first time since she found him, he looked less lost, less afraid. When Hannah finally walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind her, she felt something new inside her, something warm and steady. She had brought home a tired, broken man wearing a tattoo from her past. But now she knew the truth. The man she saved from the auction was the same man who once saved her from death. And now, without meaning to, they were connected again. How the future would unfold, she didn't know, but she vowed one thing silently as she stood in the hallway. She wasn't going to let him walk away again. Not until he knew he wasn't alone anymore. Not until he understood his life still had value. Not until she helped him find the peace he had lost so long ago. The next morning, Hannah found Elias already awake and standing outside the cottage, looking at the hills in silence. The early light touched his face, showing lines of exhaustion that went deeper than just lack of sleep. He heard her steps and turned slightly, giving a quiet nod. Hannah returned the nod but didn't speak yet. She could sense something weighing heavily on him, something he hadn't told her. She brought him tea and handed it to him. Elias accepted it with both hands, as if unsure how to receive something so simple. "Thank you," he said softly. They sat on the old wooden bench outside. For a few minutes, neither spoke. The wind moved gently across the grass, and birds called from far away. It was peaceful, but Hannah knew inside Elias there was no peace yet. She could see it in the way he kept his back straight, as if always ready for something to happen. After a while, Hannah finally asked, "Can you tell me more about the tattoo you have?" Elias looked down at his forearm, his thumb brushing over the faded lines. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then his voice came low and slow. "It belonged to a small team, not official, not famous. We didn't wear uniforms or badges. It was just a group of people who couldn't walk away from trouble." Hannah listened quietly. "We didn't get paid. We didn't get thanked. We went wherever someone needed help. Landslides, storms, fires, floods." He paused, looking into the distance. "We weren't part of the government, just people with training, people who wanted to make a difference before help arrived." Hannah felt her heart tighten. "So the night you saved me?" Elias nodded. "Yes. We were nearby when we heard the crash. We arrived before any rescue teams. Our rule was simple: save who we can and leave before authorities came. We weren't supposed to take credit or stay for interviews." "Why?" Hannah asked softly. "Because not all of us had clean histories," he said. "Some were ex-workers who had trouble with their employers. Some had debts. Some were just people who didn't want their names known. But they still wanted to help." He looked at his tattoo again. This mark was how we recognized each other. Hannah felt respect for him, even more than before, but something else pressed in her heart. "What happened to your team?" Elias's eyes darkened. "One rescue went wrong. Not because of us, but because someone outside panicked and blamed everything on the first people they saw, us." He drew a slow breath. "I took responsibility because I was the only one who could. I didn't want the others to get in trouble." "You took the blame for something you didn't do?" Hannah whispered. "It was easier," he said quietly. "And after that, they sent me from place to place, work sites, debt contracts, fields, warehouses. I kept going because I didn't know what else to do." Hannah felt a deep sadness for him. She wanted to reach out, to tell him he wasn't a burden, but she kept her voice steady. "Even after everything, you still help people. You helped that old man in the clinic yesterday. You help without thinking." Elias gave a faint, tired smile. "It's the only part of me I didn't lose." Hannah gently placed her hand over his, just resting it there. He looked at their hands, surprised but not pulling away. She could feel him fighting with something inside: pain, guilt, maybe even fear. Later that day, Hannah returned to the clinic while Elias stayed outside, repairing the old fence without her asking. She peeked at him from the window. He worked quietly, carefully, as if the small task gave him comfort. Every movement was controlled, almost practiced. She realized he needed structure, simple things that felt steady. As the afternoon passed, clouds gathered again, but this time only light rainfall touched the ground. Elias came inside, wiping his hands. Hannah invited him to sit and drink water. A calm silence settled between them. Then, without warning, a knock sounded at the front door. Hannah frowned. She rarely had unexpected visitors. When she opened the door, two men stood outside. One wore a light jacket with a badge on the shoulder. The other carried papers under his arm. Their expressions were serious. "Good afternoon," the man with the badge said. "We're looking for Elias Ward." Hannah's heart dropped. Elias stiffened behind her, his posture instantly changing. It was the first time she saw fear flash through his eyes. "What do you want with him?" Hannah asked calmly, not stepping aside. The man with the papers replied, "He belongs to a work assignment that reports him missing. He left the location without authorization." "He didn't leave," Hannah said firmly. "I bought his contract yesterday." The men exchanged glances. "We didn't receive any notice of transfer," the one with the badge said. "We need to take him back until the paperwork is verified." Elias took a small step forward. "It's fine, Hannah. I'll go." "No," Hannah said sharply, turning to him. "You didn't do anything wrong." The officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, we don't want trouble. We just have protocols." Hannah stood taller. "And I have documents." She brought out the contract papers the auctioneer gave her. The men inspected them with confusion. "These are stamped and official," Hannah said strongly. "If your system doesn't show it, then your system is the problem, not him." Elias watched her silently, a mix of shock and gratitude in his eyes. One of the men rubbed his forehead. "We need time to confirm all this." "Take all the time you want," Hannah replied, her voice steady. "But he's not leaving this house until you confirm the truth." The men finally nodded and left, saying they would return later with clarity. When the door closed, Elias stood still, breathing slowly, almost like someone waking from a nightmare. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. "Yes, I did," Hannah answered. "You deserve fairness." Elias looked down, his voice low. "People don't usually fight for me." "I'm not people." Hannah smiled gently. "I'm me." That evening, as the sky darkened and candles lit the cottage, Elias finally spoke again. "The night of the bus crash, I remember carrying a woman out. I remember her eyes. They were scared but strong. I never forgot them." Hannah felt warmth spread through her chest. "That was me," she whispered. Elias nodded slowly. "I knew. When you shouted at the auction, I recognized your voice, but I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to bring my life into yours." Hannah stepped closer. "But it's my life, too. You saved it." Elias looked away, his voice breaking slightly. "I didn't want you to see what I became." "You're not what life made you go through," she said gently. "You're who you choose to be. And I see the man who saved me, not the man who was pushed down by the world." For a long moment, Elias didn't speak. His eyes softened, and something inside him seemed to loosen, like a knot slowly untying after years of being tight. Suddenly, there was another knock at the door. Elias tensed again, but Hannah walked over and opened it. The same two men stood there, this time with different expressions. "We checked everything," the officer said. "The transfer was mishandled. Elias is not at fault. He is allowed to stay with you." Elias released a breath he had been holding for hours. "And one more thing," the second man added. "There is an old report attached to his name. It looks suspicious. You may want to request a case review." Hannah gave a firm nod. "We will." When the door closed again, Elias sat down slowly, as if his legs might fail. Hannah sat beside him. "You're free for now," she said softly. Elias shook his head gently. "Not fully." There are still things in my past. But now, Hannah said, touching his arm gently, you don't have to face them alone. Elias looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something new, hope, fragile but real. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could have a different life. A life not built on fear or guilt. A life rebuilt slowly, step by step, and Hannah knew with certainty that she would help him reach it. For the next 2 days, the cottage felt calmer than before, as if the air itself understood that Elias was no longer in danger of being taken away suddenly. But even with this small peace, Hannah could see that his mind was not resting. He moved quietly through the rooms, helping her with chores, repairing loose boards, organizing the clinic supplies, and doing any task he could find. It was as if he didn't know how to sit still, how to relax, or how to believe he truly belonged in a safe place. Hannah stayed patient. She didn't ask him to talk or explain more than he wanted. She simply stayed near him, steady and warm, showing through small actions that he wasn't alone anymore. She made sure he had proper meals, made sure he slept, and made sure he knew that he mattered. On the 3rd morning, a letter arrived from the local authority office. Hannah opened it with careful hands. Inside was a notice. They were reopening Elias's old case. The officer from yesterday had forwarded the suspicious report that seemed unfair, and now the truth would be investigated. When Hannah told Elias the news, he looked stunned, like he didn't believe such a thing was possible. They're reopening it? He asked quietly. Yes, Hannah replied, and you deserve that. You should never have carried blame for something you didn't do. Elias sat down slowly at the edge of the wooden bench. His hands trembled slightly. Hannah sat beside him. I thought this part of my life was already decided, he said. I never expected anyone to question it. Because no one knew you, Hannah said gently. But now someone does. Elias looked at her with grateful, tired eyes. What if the truth doesn't help? He asked softly. What if they don't believe me? Then I will, Hannah answered. And I will speak for you. He blinked slowly, as if he had forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand with him. The silence between them felt full, warm, and safe. Later that afternoon, the officer returned in person, holding a folder. Hannah opened the door, and Elias stepped forward, stiff but calm. I have results, the officer said as he entered. They sat at the table, the officer opening the folder and spreading out the papers. It was an error, he said firmly. The report attached to your name was filed by someone who later admitted they had no clear evidence. It should have never been used to assign blame to you. Elias stared at the paper, as if it were a mirage. So, I'm not responsible? No, the officer said. And we've already cleared your record. Your debt contract is canceled. You are fully free. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Hannah let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Elias lowered his head, covering his face with his hands. Not in shame, this time in overwhelming relief. The officer waited respectfully before gathering his paperwork and standing to leave. You're a free man, Elias, he said gently. Start your life again. When the officer left, closing the door behind him, the cottage fell into complete silence. Elias still sat with his head down, breathing slowly. Hannah sat quietly beside him, giving him time. Minutes passed before Elias finally lifted his face. His eyes were wet but steady. I don't know how to thank you, he whispered. You believed in me when no one else would. You earned that belief long before I knew you, Hannah said softly. You saved lives. You saved mine. Elias shook his head gently. I didn't expect to ever hear words like that again. Hannah reached out and touched his hand lightly. Then hear them now. As many times as you need." A warm stillness settled between them, the kind of stillness that comes when fear loosens its grip and hope begins to grow. That evening, Hannah made a simple dinner, and they ate on the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills. For the first time, Elias didn't tense at every sound. His shoulders rested more naturally. His voice sounded steadier when he spoke. "Now that I'm free," he said quietly, "I should leave soon." Hannah felt her heart stop for a moment. "Leave," she repeated. "Why?" He looked down at his hands. "Because you have a peaceful life here. I don't want to disturb it. I don't know how to live a normal life anymore. I don't want to bring any shadows into your home." Hannah stared at him, shocked that he thought leaving was the right choice. "You think your presence disturbs my life?" Elias hesitated. "I just don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Hannah said firmly. "You never were." He lifted his eyes, confused. "Then why did you buy my contract? Why did you fight for me?" Hannah's voice softened. "Because I recognized the man who saved me, because I saw someone worth saving too, because you mattered to me from the moment I saw that tattoo." Elias swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to stay. I've spent so many years running, moving, being pushed from place to place. I don't know how to build anything." "Then start small," Hannah said, her voice warm. "Start with safety, with rest, with kindness, and stay where you're welcomed." "Am I really welcomed here?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "You are," she answered without hesitation, "as long as you want to be." Elias closed his eyes for a moment, as if letting the words sink deep into him. When he opened them, something had changed, a quiet acceptance, a gentle hope. "I want to stay," he said softly. "If you're sure." "I'm very sure," Hannah replied. Days turned into weeks. Elias didn't leave. Instead, he slowly began building a new routine. He helped Hannah in the clinic every morning, learned how to organize medicine and tools, and even assisted her in comforting patients who were afraid. His calm presence made people trust him. Children who came for checkups often sat near him without fear. When he wasn't in the clinic, he worked around the cottage, fixing broken steps, sealing cracks, making the old place feel stronger. Hannah realized that repairing things gave him peace. It was as if every nail he hammered helped rebuild something inside him, too. One evening, Hannah found him sitting on the porch holding an old item, a worn medical bag, faded and dusty. Her breath caught. It was the same bag she had lost in the bus crash years ago. "I found it," Elias said quietly. "I kept it all this time. It was the only thing I carried from that night." Hannah took the bag in her hands, tears rising in her eyes. "Why did you keep it?" Elias looked at her with gentle honesty. "Because it reminded me of the life I saved. Even when everything else in my world fell apart, I held on to this. I didn't know why before, but now I do." He paused, his voice warm and calm. "I saved you because something inside me said your life mattered, and now I understand why." Hannah felt her heart swell with emotion. The moment was quiet but full of meaning, like a long, winding journey had finally reached a peaceful place. Elias stood and faced her, the evening light soft around them. "Thank you, Hannah," he said, "for giving me a chance to be human again." "You always were," she whispered. And there, on that quiet porch, with the hills glowing softly, the wind gentle, and the world finally calm, Elias began his new life. Not as a drifting worker or a forgotten rescuer, but as a man who finally found a place where he could breathe, heal, and belong. And Hannah, who once had been saved by a stranger with a tattoo, now saved him in return. Not with dramatic actions, but with patience, kindness, and the courage to say he was worth something. Their paths, once crossed by accident, now stayed side by choice, and that choice changed everything.